Today we'll be discussing Herodotus' histories and some of the amazing accounts detailed within its pages. First, let's look at who the ancients believed were the most ancient race of people, beginning with King Psammetichus, an Egyptian pharaoh. King Psammetichus descended from a long line of royal blood, and this was something he was very proud of. Even then, he knew how ancient the Egyptian people were, and he himself believed the Egyptians were the most ancient race of people. However, he wanted to prove this to himself to be true, and so he devised a plan to prove it one way or the other. King Psammetichus ordered a herdsman to take 2 regular kids and raise them without ever speaking to the children. They are to have no contact with anybody who could speak any language, and then ordered the herdsman to return to the pharaoh and tell him what the first words the children say that are something other than incoherent child babbling. The herdsman did as his king instructed. 2 years went past. One day the herdsman went inside to bring the children some food, as he did every day. And when he walked in, both children started yelling, "Bekos, Bekos." So the herdsman took the children to the king and presented them, and the king himself heard the children speak the word Bekos. Confused by this word, never hearing it before, the king turned to his priests and asked them, "What is Bekos?" The priests discussed it at length, then returned with an answer for their king, and said Bekos means bread in the land of the Phrygians. Upon hearing this, King Psammetichus had no choice but to yield his position and accept that the Phrygians were a far older race than the Egyptians, because the language of the Phrygians was the language that humans would have developed without ever hearing any other language, thus making it the very first language. And linguistic professors today agree that the very first language came from Turkey, which is exactly where Phrygia is, modern-day Turkey. Next, we're going to look at one of the most fascinating observations made by Herodotus on his journey to the land of Ethiopia. Some of the observations that were made in Ethiopia separated from Egypt, but they had completely different customs. In Ethiopia, their kings were chosen by who was the tallest member and who could pull a king's bow back the furthest. The biggest, strongest guy would become pharaoh, and everybody had an equal chance at becoming pharaoh. Another strange difference was their belief of gods in living form. The Ethiopians claimed that there has not been a god in living human form on earth for 341 generations, averaging out 3 generations for 100 years. That would put it over 11,000 years ago that a god in human form lived on earth. And of course, as we all know, that god was Osiris, who they believed for a fact was the first living god. Herodotus goes on to state how the only way to tell the difference between an Egyptian and an Ethiopian is through their customs, because they looked exactly the same. And one of their customs that was strangely different was what they did with their dead. Although both the Egyptians and the Ethiopians mummified their dead, Herodotus describes gigantic pieces of crystal hollowed out and the mummy put inside. Herodotus describes how these mummies were perfectly preserved. The bodies looked as if they had died that very day, and they had been dead for years. But after 10 years, they would bury the giant crystal sarcophagus for good. I'll see you guys next time. UFO Proof out.